It all started with a bark that wouldn't stop. At first, Officer Daniels thought it was just another patrol. A quiet afternoon. A routine check at the port of Crescent Bay. The wind was stiff off the water. Gulls circled high above, and most of the dock workers had already clocked out. Nothing unusual, until Bear, the department's most decorated K-9 unit, suddenly tore the leash from his hand and lunged toward a line of rusted shipping containers stacked in the back lot. The bark, low, guttural, and relentless, rattled Daniels more than he cared to admit. He'd been through bomb threats, cartel raids, even a hostage standoff in Baton Rouge, but there was something in Bear's tone that felt different. Not fear, not anger, urgency. Bear's paws clanged against the metal wall of a faded green container, marked unregistered. He began clawing at the seam like his life depended on it. "What the hell's gotten into you?" Daniels muttered, unholstering his flashlight and shining it along the dusty trail that led behind the rows of crates. No movement. No sound. But Bear didn't move. He kept barking, eyes locked on that container like it was hiding something, alive. Something it wasn't supposed to. The container in question hadn't been listed in the port's official manifest for over 2 years. Technically, it shouldn't even be there. It sat just outside the camera's coverage range, tucked behind a stack of broken pallets and overgrown with weeds. A blind spot? Daniels keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniels. I've got K-9 Bear fixated on an unlisted container. No visible heat signature, requesting backup." Static buzzed, followed by a bored voice on the other end. "Affirmative. Nearest unit's 10 minutes out. You want us to send Port Authority too?" Daniels hesitated. Bear was now whimpering. Not from fear, from frustration. "Negative," he said. "Just the unit." He stepped closer, ran his hand along the rusted latch, locked tight with a bolt that hadn't moved in years. That's when he saw it. A single red zip tie looped loosely around the handle. Fresh, less than a day old. Someone had been here, recently. His instincts told him to wait for backup. But Bear was never wrong. Not once in 7 years. Daniels unclipped his multi-tool, snapped the tie, and wrenched the door open. The smell hit him first. Sour, rotting, human. He staggered back, gagging, as Bear charged inside. And that's when he heard it, a soft, muffled thump. Then, a cry. Inside, the light from his flashlight danced across plywood crates, black trash bags, and what looked like industrial food containers. It could have been a forgotten pantry, or maybe discarded inventory, but in the corner, wedged behind 2 plastic barrels, was a small blanket, and it moved. Bear began circling it, sniffing fast, ears back, tail rigid. Daniels approached slowly, crouching down. "Hey there," he whispered. "It's okay. I'm with the police." As he pulled back the edge of the blanket, his breath caught in his throat. A girl, maybe 9, maybe younger. Pale, trembling, eyes wide with something beyond fear. Holy. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She just held up her hands in a motion he would never forget, wrists together as if asking to be handcuffed. Daniels fumbled for his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a juvenile female, alive. Appears disoriented. No injuries visible, but possibly dehydrated or drugged. I need medics, now." The girl clung to Bear like she'd known him forever. By the time the other officers arrived, Daniels had already secured the container and marked it as a crime scene. Forensics would need hours, maybe days, to process it all. But there was one thing he knew without a doubt. That girl hadn't been there long, maybe 24 hours, maybe less. The mystery, though, was this. How did she end up in a forgotten shipping container that no one was supposed to know about? And why was Bear, out of all the places on that massive dock, drawn to this exact one? Coincidence? Not a chance. If you're captivated by true stories of bravery and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where real courage is never silent. It didn't take long for media to catch wind of the story. "K-9 dog saves missing girl in shipping container" headlined the morning news. But behind closed doors, the Crescent Bay PD was shaken. They had no reports of missing girls matching her description. She didn't speak English. Not well, anyway. All she kept repeating was a single phrase in broken Spanish. Las luces rojas. El camión grande. Siempre oscuridad. Translation: red lights, big truck, always darkness. A translator tried to get more, but she shut down. Withdrawn. Eyes darting every time a loud noise echoed. Something was off. Daniels sat with her in the hospital room, Bear lying quietly beside the bed, eyes alert. The girl didn't speak. But she reached out slowly and touched Bear's badge. Amigo, she said. Bueno, pero. Daniels smiled, but his chest ached. She'd clearly been through hell. And somehow, Bear had found her anyway. Back at the port, investigators ran a check on the container's serial number. It had last been registered to a disaster relief organization in Mexico City, one that had shut down nearly 4 years ago. The trail went cold after that, until they pulled the security logs. One grainy recording showed a semi-truck arriving just before dawn 2 days earlier. The container had been placed silently by a crane operator not listed in the employee database. No license plate, no driver face captured, just a single sticker left on the side of the truck, a blue butterfly inside a red triangle. No one recognized the symbol, except for one federal agent who had joined the investigation late. Jesus, she muttered, staring at the footage. They're back. Daniels turned to her. Who? But she didn't answer. Not yet. She just looked at Bear and then at the girl recovering in the hospital and said, "This wasn't a random drop. That dog just uncovered something we've been chasing for 6 years." Officer Daniels didn't sleep that night. Even after the girl was moved to a secure wing at Mercy Children's Hospital. Even after Bear curled up by the front door of his modest one-bedroom apartment like everything was fine, Daniels's mind was racing. What kind of monster hides a child in a sealed shipping container, and more importantly, how many more were out there? He couldn't stop thinking about the symbol, the butterfly inside the red triangle. It wasn't a gang tag. It wasn't cartel. It was clean, almost corporate. The woman from the bureau, Special Agent Rain, said they'd seen it before. Daniels wanted answers, but she was tight-lipped. "This isn't just trafficking," she had said on her way out of the port. "It's organized logistics, international." Daniels had stared at her, stunned. Organized logistics? What the hell kind of people ship children like cargo? The next morning, Daniels was called into a joint task force meeting held in an unmarked federal building off the highway. Fluorescent lights, black coffee, tired faces. Nobody was smiling. Rain stood at the head of the table, a file in her hand thicker than a phone book. "Operation Monarch," she began. "Started as a border surveillance case. Trucks moving between Central America and southern U.S. ports. Every shipment had one thing in common, this symbol." She tapped the butterfly triangle logo displayed on the projector. "Who runs it?" Daniels asked. Rain hesitated. "That's the problem. They don't exist on paper. The names shift. So do the companies. They file as nonprofits, charities, disaster relief. They use abandoned IDs, ghost truck drivers, fake routing manifests. And they never use the same port twice." Daniels frowned. "Then why Crescent Bay?" She gave him a hard look. "That's what we're about to find out." Bear sat quietly beside him through the entire meeting, but Daniels could feel the dog's tension. The alert posture, the flicking ears, the way he kept looking toward the hallway. When they left the room, Daniels knelt and scratched the dog's neck. "You smell something?" Bear huffed, then turned toward the elevator. "Instinct. Gut. Something in the air." "Go ahead, boy," Daniels said. "Let's see where it leads." They ended up in the evidence room, rows of sealed bags, hard drives, and boxes pulled from the shipping container. Nothing labeled, everything pending analysis. But Bear didn't hesitate. He walked straight to a crate marked "Medical Supplies, Expired." Daniels cracked it open. Inside were dozens of sealed plastic folders, each containing photographs, notes in Spanish and English, and passport copies of children. Their real names, ages, even their preferred fake names. One girl, age 7, listed as Flora, her original name scratched out. Another, Esteban, 10 years old. Medical history listed. Allergy to penicillin circled in red. These weren't random victims. These were inventory sheets. Daniels felt sick. Later that day, Rain called Daniels into her office. "Where'd the dog lead you?" she asked, arms crossed. Daniels set the files on her desk. Rain flipped one open. Her face tightened. "We've seen this format before," she said, "but never this detailed. This is a sales log." Daniels couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Sales?" Rain nodded grimly. "Private auctions. Invite only. Held in the deep web. Routed through non-traceable servers. These kids aren't just taken. They're ordered. By profile, age, skin tone, even medical needs." Daniels leaned back in his chair, stunned. "And you're saying this has been happening for how long?" "At least a decade," she said. "Maybe more." That evening, Daniels stopped by the hospital. The girl, whose name turned out to be Lucia, had finally started eating solid food. A nurse said she asked for polo con arroz, just like her mother used to make. Daniel smiled at the memory. It was his own mom's go-to when he had a fever growing up in South Carolina. Lucia had drawn something earlier that day, a crayon image of a truck with a butterfly logo. Behind it, stick figures with sad faces. One of them was inside a box, but what really caught Daniel's attention was the other shape in the drawing, a small black and brown dog with a gold star on its chest. Bear Lucia looked at him, then at Bear, and whispered, "Buen perro." Daniels nodded, the best. The next morning, the task force raided a warehouse 30 miles inland based on routing numbers found in the files Bear had led them to. It looked abandoned from the outside, surrounded by brush and covered in graffiti. But inside was a high-tech operation, laptops still warm. Power generators humming, shipping manifests on the wall, this time routed to Phoenix, El Paso, and St. Louis. No people, just the setup. And in the back, 4 more containers, 3 empty, 1 locked. They heard the banging before they even opened. And inside were 2 boys and a girl, all under 10. They were alive. By now, the story had gone national. CNN, Fox, even local talk radio hosts were buzzing. Is this the tip of a trafficking iceberg? Why did it take a dog to expose what authorities missed? Daniels tried to ignore the media circus. He wasn't in it for the credit, but Bear just kept working. Back at Crescent Bay, the forensic team ran a DNA test on an old water bottle found in the original container. It came back linked to a missing persons case out of Houston, a girl gone for over 5 years. Lucia wasn't the first, and if they didn't act fast, she wouldn't be the last either. That night, Daniels sat on the steps of the precinct, watching Bear sniff a box of toys they'd collected for the rescued kids. "You know," he muttered, "I used to think dogs just followed training, but you," Bear licked his hand, "you follow something else, don't you? Something deeper." The next day, Rain pulled Daniels aside. "We got a hit on the truck that dropped the first container. Caught on a security camera near Tucson." She slid a photo across the table. It was blurry, but there was no mistaking it. The same butterfly triangle, same truck make, same symbol. And this time, the driver's face was clearly visible. Rain tapped the image. "We ID'd him. He's an ex-military contractor. Discharged under suspicious circumstances. Now works for a logistics firm tied to 4 other missing children cases." Daniels stared at the screen. "Let me guess. That firm's not real either." "Correct," Rain said. "But the address is, and it's in Nevada." Daniels stood up. "So what are we waiting for?" Rain smiled. "We're not." They were on the road by dusk, Bear in the back seat, ears perked, eyes trained on the horizon. Lucia had been moved to a federal protection facility. The other kids were being matched to international agencies for reunification. But Daniels knew this wasn't over. It wasn't even close. There were more containers, more ghosts, more names scratched out and replaced. But there was also Bear. And if Bear had taught him anything, it was this. You don't have to speak the same language to understand pain. You just have to listen to what the silence is trying to say. Nevada looked peaceful from the highway. Flat desert plains, orange dust, rolling heat waves shimmering off the pavement. A place where secrets could bake for years under the sun without anyone noticing. But for Officer Daniels, this wasn't a road trip. This was a hunt. And Bear, sitting alert in the back seat, knew it too. Next to Daniels in the SUV was Special Agent Rain, tapping her fingers on a folder thick with intel. Satellite images, personnel lists, bank transactions. Everything pointed to one place, Desert Sun Logistics, a warehouse operation on the edge of nowhere. How many people work at this site? Daniels asked, eyes fixed on the road. On paper? Rain replied. 4. And off paper? She looked out the window. We're about to find out. They arrived at noon. The sun overhead was brutal, casting hard shadows against the corrugated metal walls of the warehouse. No signage, no cameras, no visible guards. But Bear stiffened immediately. Daniels stepped out, scanning the area. Rain kept one hand near her holster. Let him lead, she said. Daniels unclipped the leash. Go on, Bear. The dog patted, forward nose to the ground. He sniffed past the main roll-up door, past the fence, and stopped at a side entrance. He sat, looked up at Daniels, and barked once, sharp and sure. Daniels drew his weapon. Bingo. Inside, the air was cool and dry. Overhead lights buzzed faintly. It looked like a normal shipping hub. Shelves of plastic bins, forklifts, stacks of crates labeled office electronics, and used books. But Bear wasn't fooled. He darted between aisles until he reached a shelf marked Zone C. Without hesitation, he leapt onto a crate and began pawing at the back wall. Rain joined them, flashlight in hand. There's a draft, she said, placing her palm against the metal. Daniels found a latch behind one of the lower crates. Click. The entire panel creaked open, revealing a stairwell leading underground. They exchanged a look. Ready? Rain asked. Daniels nodded. Let's go. The staircase led to a concrete tunnel, dimly lit with yellow bulbs spaced every 10 feet. It smelled faintly of bleach and something worse. Fear. At the end of the tunnel was a thick steel door with a biometric lock. But someone had been here recently. The door was slightly ajar. Bear pushed through first. Daniels followed with his flashlight raised and froze. It wasn't a basement. It was a facility. The room opened into a vast, windowless chamber lined with hospital beds, IV poles, medical machines, cabinets full of syringes, paperwork, and child-sized clothing. Along the far wall were cages, clean, empty, numbered. Rain's voice was cold and flat. They were processing them here, drugging them, prepping them for transport. Daniel swallowed hard, heart pounding. How many kids went through here? I don't know, she said. But it's been active for months. Bear began barking in the corner. They turned and found a small closet. Inside was a cell phone, still charging, and a list of names. In sharp black ink, Rain picked it up, eyes narrowing. This is a live manifest. Daniels felt a chill crawl up his spine. Then we're not just chasing ghosts anymore. Back on the surface, they called for backup. Within hours, the FBI swept the facility. They found documents tracing shipments back to 5 states: Illinois, Texas, Florida, Colorado, and one that hit Daniels like a freight train: South Carolina, his home state, his hometown. He took a deep breath, trying to suppress the rising nausea. I need to make a call. Rain glanced over. Family? He shook his head. An old case. A missing girl from back home. We thought she ran away, but now... He didn't finish the sentence. Some stories didn't need endings. Not yet. The next day, they brought Lucia to a federal safe house, a facility built to protect high-risk juvenile witnesses. She had begun to speak a little more, mostly about Bear. He finds lost children, she said matter-of-factly to a nurse. Daniels overheard it and smiled. Yeah, he said. That's kinda his thing. Lucia handed him a folded drawing she'd made. Bear standing in front of a shipping container, barking at the dark. Behind him were dozens of small hands reaching through the cracks. Are those your friends? He asked. She nodded. Then she whispered. They were taken on Tuesday. The truck had a yellow back. Daniels froze. That was new information. And it could mean one thing. Someone else was already in transit. Right now. Within hours, an Amber Alert from Arizona confirmed it. 2 children, ages 6 and 9, had gone missing at a gas station on the outskirts of Phoenix. Surveillance footage showed them being walked to a yellow box truck by a man in a high-vis vest. The truck had no plates. No dot numbers. Nothing. But Bear. Bear recognized the scent. They flew out that night. The next morning, Bear led officers and federal agents to a rest stop off I-17, abandoned, remote, surrounded by desert. There was no truck, but Bear picked up the trail. He bolted through the brush, barking furiously until he reached a metal hatch in the ground, half covered by a tarp and sand. The officers exchanged wary glances. Daniels didn't hesitate. He pulled the hatch open. Below was a storm-drained tunnel, and inside were the 2 missing kids, tied together, crying softly. They were alive. The man in the vest was long gone, but he'd left behind his phone, a backpack, and once again, the butterfly triangle logo spray-painted on a wall. Back at headquarters, Rain paced in front of a board filled with pins and strings like something out of a detective movie. Every time we think we've caught up, she said, they move the goalpost. Daniel sipped bad coffee. Then we stop playing their game. Rain looked up. What do you mean? We use Bear. We don't wait. We act. Wherever he leads, we follow. No more red tape. She considered it and nodded. You think he's got another lead? Daniels looked down at Bear, who was staring out the window of the precinct, ears twitching. He always does. The next day, they returned to the original port in Crescent Bay to recheck the logs, this time with Bear. Everyone thought the site was clean. Bear disagreed. He walked past the marked containers, sniffed a manhole cover, and kept going until he stopped at a pile of trash behind the loading dock. Then he sat. Daniels sighed. Trash? But when Bear began barking again, Daniels followed his nose. Under the trash pile, they found a rusted hatch. Inside was a maintenance tunnel leading to a private dock with a speedboat, and a map taped to the wall. 3 routes, 3 destinations, 3 more containers. Rain scanned the map. This isn't over, she said. Daniels smiled grimly. It's just getting started. That night, Daniels took Bear for a walk near the lake by his apartment. The moon was full, casting silver light on the water. You know, he said, tossing Bear a treat. You're not just a hero, you're a lifeline. Bear wagged his tail, then trotted ahead, ears perked toward the trees. Always alert, always ready. Because somewhere out there in some forgotten dock or shadowy truck, another child is waiting. And Bear won't stop until he finds them. The smell of salt water and gasoline hung thick in the air as the team stood at the edge of the hidden dock. 3 faded lines marked the concrete. A, B, and C, each corresponding to the smuggler's map Bear had uncovered the night before. They were old, worn, but still visible. The small speedboat tied up at Dock B bobbed quietly with the current. Its motor was still warm. Daniels crouched near the boat's hull, running his hand along a scuffed patch of paint. This boat didn't just arrive, he said. It's been running back and forth for days. Agent Rain knelt beside him, examining a red rope fiber caught between the boat's cleat and hull. These lines match the ones found in that underground facility in Nevada. Same knot style, same fiber. Daniels looked at Bear. The German shepherd stood at the edge of Dock C, motionless, nose to the wind. Then he barked. Once. Sharp. Focused. Final. They followed Bear's lead across the rickety dock and down a gravel path behind the old warehouse. After nearly half a mile of overgrown brush and marsh grass, they found it. A metal storage shed, half sunk into the ground, camouflaged with scrap wood and fishing nets. Daniel stepped forward, flashlight aimed at the door. "No lock," he whispered. Someone wanted to get in and out fast. Rain drew her weapon and gave him a nod. Daniels opened the door. Inside was a freezer, a long, white, commercial-grade walk-in freezer, unplugged, slightly open. The stench hit like a punch to the gut. Bear began to whine. Daniels stepped inside. Slowly, his boots echoing on the steel floor. What he saw stopped him cold. Dozens of school backpacks lined one wall, each one labeled with masking tape, each name handwritten. On the other side of the freezer were bins, some filled with clothing, some with shoes, others with files. He picked one up. The label read, "Dallas, Lot 31. Rain flipped through. Another. "Charlotte, Lot 14. Daniels felt his stomach twist. This was a transfer hub, he said. They weren't just hiding kids here. They were staging them. Back at headquarters, the evidence flooded in. Every bag, every file, every crayon drawing and ID copy. Rain brought in a forensic team. Daniels coordinated with missing persons units from over a dozen states. And Bear paced the office, unsettled. Something still felt off. "There's more," Daniels muttered, staring at the wall of data. "They've got too many routes, too many aliases. This didn't start in Crescent Bay or Nevada." Rain nodded. "This network's older than we thought." "How old?" Daniels asked. She opened a folder marked, "Confidential. Case." Nightfall and laid out a faded photo. 3 girls, early teens, holding hands in a dark warehouse. The year stamped on the bottom, 2012. One of them had the same name as a file Bear found in the Nevada facility. Daniels leaned in. "That girl, she vanished in Georgia. I remember that case." Rain locked eyes with him. "It was buried." "By who?" She didn't answer right away. "Let's just say some people wanted it forgotten." That night, Daniels sat in his truck outside the safe house where Lucia was staying. He hadn't spoken to her in days, trying to respect her recovery, but she'd asked to see Bear. The nurse led them inside to a small room with a window view of a garden and a TV playing cartoons. Lucia was coloring again, her small hands smudged with crayon. When Bear walked in, her face lit up. "Perro valiente," she whispered. "He finds the lost ones." Daniels smiled. "You gave us a lot of clues, Lucia. We couldn't have done this without you." She looked up. "But he knows where the last ones are." Daniels froze. "What do you mean, the last ones?" She pointed to her drawing. It showed a cargo ship, a red hull, smokestacks, kids inside boxes. Daniels felt his blood run cold. "You saw this ship?" She nodded. "They said we go home on the boat." But home was never real. The next morning, Rain confirmed it. Satellite data showed a freighter had departed Crescent Bay under a false flag 3 nights earlier, disguised as a salvage vessel. No registered cargo. Destination, unknown. They cross-checked it against Lucia's drawing and maritime tracking systems. The ship was real, and it was heading for international waters fast. They had less than 18 hours before it would be beyond reach. Daniel slammed his fist against the desk. "We can't let them vanish." Rain didn't hesitate. "We're calling in the Coast Guard." 12 hours later, a chopper soared above the Pacific. Daniels, Rain, and Bear were on board, wearing flight harnesses as the waves rolled below. "This is the last shot," Rain yelled over the rotor noise. "No second chances." The ship came into view, a rust-stained hulk with no name on the side and its lights out. Ghostly. Silent. The Coast Guard vessel signaled them to lower. Bear barked the moment his paws hit the deck, and then he ran. Through the narrow passages, down the iron stairs, past the sleeping crew. He stopped at a locked bulkhead and scratched furiously. Daniels didn't wait for tools. He fired the hinge. Behind the door, 6 children. Scared. Dirty. Alive. They flew back to land just before dawn. Every rescued child was met with medical care, blankets, and names called out softly by social workers trained to help trauma victims. One girl clung to Bear and wouldn't let go. Another boy whispered, "I knew someone would find us." Daniels knelt beside Bear. "You did it again, partner." Bear blinked slowly, then rested his head on Daniels' lap. By noon, the press caught wind of the rescue, but the officials gave credit where it was due. It wasn't just federal coordination or a task force, Rain told reporters. It was a dog, a canine named Bear, who trusted his instincts when humans failed to look. Daniel stood behind her, arms folded, watching the cameras roll, but his eyes were already scanning the horizon. Because as heroic as this rescue was, they both knew something bigger still loomed. One last network, one last location, and one last name on the list. A girl missing for 11 years, with ties to the same organization that had just gone silent. "Daniels," whispered to Bear, "think we've got one more left in us?" Bear stood up, tail stiff, nose to the air. "Ready. Some cases leave a scar you don't talk about." For Officer Daniels, it was a girl named Emily Rose Caldwell. She vanished from a school field trip 11 years ago. One minute she was standing in line at the zoo, the next she was gone. No struggle, no witnesses, no leads. Just a pink backpack found near a back gate and a dozen broken hearts left in the wake. Daniels wasn't even a detective then, just a rookie traffic cop assigned to crowd control during the search. But he remembered her photo. Big hazel eyes, missing front tooth, hair in a crooked ponytail. He never forgot it. Now that same name had surfaced in a file recovered from the shipping container network Bear uncovered. Emily's birth date, her physical description, and a stamp in the corner of the page. Transferred. Monarch Project. Daniel stared at the file. She's alive. Rain didn't say anything at first. She simply slid a second folder across the table. A blurry image of a teenage girl taken by drone 3 weeks ago outside a warehouse in upstate New York. Long hair, slender build, a bandage on her arm. Daniels looked up. "You think that's her?" "We're not sure," Rain said. "But she fits the age, the height, and the scar Emily had on her left wrist from a broken window back in 2010. Daniels pushed back his chair and stood up. "Then don't wait." The flight to New York was quiet. Bear rested at Daniels' feet, head on his paws, calm but watchful. Rain sat across the aisle, flipping through a digital file of the compound they were targeting. An old psychiatric facility that had been shut down for years and purchased through shell companies under fake names. Daniel stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by like ghosts. "I was just a kid," he muttered. "But I remember her mom. She was the only parent who never cried on camera. Said crying made her daughter think she wasn't coming home." Rain looked over. "Then let's bring her home." They landed at dawn. The air was damp and cold, and fog rolled off the trees like a curtain. The team met in an unmarked van parked a mile from the site. Drones confirmed movement inside. 2 vehicles, several armed men, and heat signatures suggesting at least 8 people inside the facility. Bear jumped down from the van and immediately began sniffing the trail. He didn't hesitate. He didn't need direction. He knew. Daniels checked his gear. "We go in fast and clean, no risks." Rain nodded. "We get the kids out first. Everything else comes second." The compound was nestled in the woods, surrounded by fences and overgrown brush. The main building looked like a relic from the Cold War, steel shutters, satellite dishes, and cracked stone steps leading to a heavy door. They breached it in under 10 seconds. Inside, the smell of mildew and antiseptic stung the nose. Bear led the way through the main hallway and down into the lower wing. Daniels followed closely, adrenaline pumping. Then Bear stopped at a locked door. He barked, sharp and urgent. Daniels kicked it open. Inside were 5 teens, each no older than 16, all curled in corners of a room lined with mattresses and security cameras. They flinched at the light, but didn't scream. Rain rushed in, with the backup team. "You're safe now. We're here to help." But Bear wasn't done. He ran past the room and toward a second hallway marked "Staff Only." They found her in the back room, sitting on a metal cot, staring out a barred window. At the trees, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned her head when Bear entered the room, ears low, tail still. "Emily?" Daniels asked softly. The girl blinked. She looked older than 17, thinner, paler, like she'd lived too many lives in too little time. But the scar was there, just beneath her left sleeve, and when she spoke, it was barely a whisper. "My mom used to say God sent angels in fur." Bear walked to her and sat down at her feet. Emily leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him. And finally, she cried. Back at the command post, Rain processed the other kids while Daniel sat beside Emily, a blanket around her shoulders and a space heater at her feet. "Do you know where you were taken from?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I remember a truck, a box, then a place with lights and people speaking languages I didn't know." Daniels listened quietly. "I thought no one was looking anymore," she added. "But then I heard the barking. That same bark from years ago, it's like I knew." He smiled. "He's got a way of showing up when you need him most." The media exploded that night. Canine Bear rescues girl missing for 11 years. News anchors called it a miracle. Social media called Bear a hero. Even the mayor from Daniels' hometown issued a public statement of gratitude. But for Daniels, it wasn't about headlines. It was about a promise made when he was still too green to wear a badge. "We won't stop looking." Now that promise was fulfilled. And Bear? He curled up on a warm bed that night beside Emily's cot, keeping one eye open, just in case. 2 days later, Daniels and Rain sat in front of a Senate subcommittee on child trafficking. They laid out everything: how the shipping containers were disguised, how the ports were compromised, how Bear had sniffed out evidence dozens of trained agents had missed. But when they showed the committee members Emily's recovered file, the room went silent, because her case had been marked inactive for over 6 years, and yet a dog found her anyway. Rain finished her testimony with a single sentence: "You can train officers, you can write protocols, but you can't teach instinct like Bear's." Later, in the parking lot, Daniels clipped Bear's leash and smiled. "You ready to go home, partner?" Bear barked once. But before they left, a young woman walked up, holding a crumpled photo. It was Emily's mother. She didn't speak. She just hugged Bear and whispered, "Thank you." Then she looked at Daniels. "Can you tell me something?" He nodded. Why did he keep looking? Daniels didn't hesitate. Because someone had to. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel sat on the porch of his small home in South Carolina, watching Bear chase a ball across the lawn. Emily was safe. The network was dismantled. Dozens of kids reunited with their families. But he knew it wasn't the end. Because somewhere out there, behind another fake charity, another empty truck, another closed door, there would be another child, another cry in the dark. And when that time came, Bear would be ready. The rain came down steady that morning. Not the kind that makes headlines, just a slow, soaking drizzle that seemed to wash the world clean. Officer Daniels stood beneath the awning outside the precinct, watching the ripples spread across the parking lot. Bear sat beside him, calm as ever, eyes scanning the horizon like he was waiting for something. It had been a week since Emily Caldwell was rescued, 7 days since the last shipping route was shut down, 7 days since Daniels let himself believe for just a moment that maybe the nightmare was over. But then came the phone call. It was Agent Rain, her voice tight with urgency. "We've got a problem." Daniels straightened. "Where?" "A rural clinic outside Omaha. One of our undercover guys just sent us a picture. It's the same damn butterfly symbol, painted on the floor of a locked basement room." Daniels felt that familiar cold knot in his gut. "You think it's connected?" "I know it is." She paused, then added, "And Bear's the only one who can confirm it." They flew out that night. The clinic sat at the end of a gravel road tucked between empty fields and silos. It looked abandoned from the outside, its windows covered in grime, the sign out front cracked down the middle. But the power was on, and Bear, Bear was already on edge the moment his paws hit the ground. Daniels followed his partner around the side of the building. They entered through a back door, careful not to alert anyone inside. Rain and her team had secured a warrant and cleared most of the building hours earlier, but one room remained untouched. A steel hatch in the supply room. Floor. Bear growled before Daniels even touched the handle. "Ready?" Daniels whispered. Bear barked once. He opened the hatch and dropped into the darkness. The smell was the first giveaway. Disinfectant. Mold. Something worse beneath it. Bear moved cautiously, nose to the ground, leading them down a narrow concrete tunnel. It ended in a cold, windowless room filled with metal filing cabinets and heavy-duty crates. And in the center, a surgical chair, shackles attached. Daniel's breath caught. This wasn't a storage space. It was a processing center. Bear circled the room, sniffing the baseboards, the crates, the pipes. Then he stopped at one wall and began pawing furiously. Daniels helped pry loose a panel. Behind it were passports. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all fake, all matching children reported missing over the past 2 years. Rain stepped in behind them. "My God." Daniels shook his head. They were setting up shop again. Back at the command post, federal agents began pulling data off a seized hard drive found inside the clinic. It was encrypted, but the file titles told the story. Phase 2, European Roots. Client Index, Eastern States, Donor List, Confidential. Daniels stared at the screen. These people weren't finished. They were expanding. Rain nodded grimly. "But now we know. Now we have names. We can finally tear it all down." Bear nudged Daniel's leg. He looked down and smiled. "Yeah, thanks to you." The next day, Daniels and Bear flew back to South Carolina. There was no press this time. No interviews. No headlines. Just a quiet homecoming. Emily Caldwell had been reunited with her mother. The other rescued children were in therapy, slowly piecing their lives back together. Rain had been promoted to lead a permanent federal task force dedicated to dismantling trafficking networks in all 50 states. And Daniels? He went back to patrol. Because not every hero needs a badge with stars. Some just need a leash, a nose, and a heart big enough to carry the pain of others. 2 weeks passed. One morning, Daniels was called to a local elementary school to give a ER safety talk for third graders. Bear came along naturally. The kids loved him. He wore a special canine vest that said "Hero Dog" in bright yellow letters, and every time Daniels finished a sentence, Bear would bark once like he was answering questions. One little girl raised her hand and asked, "Does Bear understand when people are scared?" Daniel smiled. He doesn't just understand. He finds the ones who are scared and brings them home. Later that afternoon, Daniel sat on his porch, sipping sweet tea, while Bear lay sprawled across the doormat. The world had changed. Some wounds had healed. Others were still raw, but justice had been served. He glanced down at the scrapbook Rain had mailed him, a collection of news clippings, thank you letters, and drawings from rescued children. One sketch showed Bear standing at the front of a dark tunnel, light pouring in behind him. The caption read, "He barked first, then the world heard me." Daniels closed the book and leaned back in his chair. They'd stopped something evil, but more importantly, they'd reminded people that heroes don't always look like what you expect. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs. Sometimes they just refuse to give up. Thank you. Thank you for following this powerful journey through all 6 parts of Bear's story. It's been an emotional, suspenseful ride filled with heartbreak, hope, and heroism. At Heroes for Animals, we believe in the bond between animals and people, and how that bond can lead to life-saving action and deep emotional healing. Now we'd love to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Officer Daniel's shoes? Would you trust your life and others to the instincts of a dog? Let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more stories that matter, that move you, and that honor the animals who step up when humanity needs them most. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and listen to those who can't speak. because sometimes they're the ones who know the truth first.